What does mature faith look like? When you first enter into faith and spirituality, it's like the first time you experience a karaoke bar, then realize you actually loved music. We only go in there because one of our friends who was too excited to be stopped forced us. We didn't write the music. We only know half the songs and are desperately dependent on the TV with a bouncing ball keeping the rhythm for the words. And we only agreed to come here after a few drinks anyways. It's questionably managed, oddly run down, yet a welcoming space where everyone has permission to live their dream of being the front person, the lead vocals for their favorite band. This type of clumsy off-key experience is how every artist starts developing, because we become a cover band since imitation is the first step in learning. At that stage of development, we're thrilled when a person walks into the room and immediately recognizes the song or maybe even starts singing along with it that we're playing because it highlights the discipline and dedication that we've developed while practicing our scales and endlessly poring over the music somebody else wrote. Others are beginning to recognize our skill, but they still can't hear our voice because that's in the process of becoming. Then a shift happens because no artist wants to spend their entire life as a cover band always playing somebody else's music. You begin to experiment bringing their music into dialogue with your own style and experience. The compliment in this stage is not recognizing the song someone else wrote. It is recognizing how you've adapted it to make it your own. It is hearing the effect of your life shaping the work of those who have influenced you. Praise becomes, I love your version of, and you name their inspiration, their favorite artist. At these times, the art is becoming our own, but the influences still heavily predict our work. They are growing, but they're still derivative. Our imagination is shaped and limited by the ones who came before us. Until we start moving on to maturity, in which the mature artist has done the work to know the masters who've come before them. Then they allow the experience of knowing the masters before and present to shape but not control the art they begin creating through many failed attempts and a few moments of inspiration where they added their own line to the song. After all, adding your own line is the point. It is how art evolves towards new experience, and it's how a faith is brought to life. As a jazz music theorist once said, you must immerse yourself in the world of jazz by listening, analyzing, and studying the masters past and present. The artist deals with life in a real-time flowing improvisational context. In jazz, the missed notes are not seen as mistakes. They are the catalyst for seasoned artists to step in and riff, creating new endings that you couldn't see coming out of their experience, skill, and style. This kind of improvisation understands the history that brought us here, but it sees the future as open and co-creative. Faith and faithfulness in the beloved community works in the same way. We improvise and we adapt based within life experience. Our goal is not to control your answers. It is to become a place which embodies a maturing love, with room to develop faith in a real-time flowing improvisational context that allows life to influence how we hold space together and the way we name beauty, God, and possibility. We're not trying to simply become a first century cover band, forever playing the classics and greatest hits of Paul. He wrote for his day. We're looking to bring it alive again. Those who would be cautious about constructing theology will always ask, how do we keep ourselves from just saying anything we want to say? Or put another way, how do we know we're staying within the faith and faithfulness of our shared Christian tradition? And those are always excellent questions. Luckily, every letter in the New Testament is asking that exact same question. They're saying, how do we stay within our tradition in such a way that allows us to respond to the events we have seen? For the Johannine or the tradition of John, it often points to How do we live as a community, seeing how Jesus lived and loved? How, with Jesus as projectile causing us to change, do we adapt towards expanding for more people? See, John began riffing from their inherited tradition, the Master's old and new, as an unfinished dialogue that we are expected to step into. All of the letters in Scripture embody jazz improvisation, which is how they found room to expand Christ's table to include not just every faction within Judaism, but also the Gentiles. And as you read through the story of Luke and Acts, you see that it just keeps expanding farther than they could have imagined. And I think it's continuing to expand that way today. So First John shows us how we can improvise our faith as we immerse ourselves in our shared tradition of Christianity by listening, analyzing, and studying the Master's past and present. Because the faithful deals with life in the real time, flowing improvisational context that allows room for adaptation and change. So first, in order to do this, we develop our voices rooted in community experience. First John opens up, and each one of the statements there are plural. It's that which we have seen, we have heard, we have come to know. It says, we have seen and our very hands have touched concerning the word of life. That which we have seen and we have heard, we make known to you in order that we can have fellowship together. So this first idea of rifting and moving and saying, what does it look like to have a community hermeneutic and ability to expand and to adapt? It says, understand that we are telling a community story and that this is not something you can do in isolation, that you leave, you go become a master, then you come back as someone with power over. Our faith is co-creative, and its depth is drawn out of the relationships and mutuality with other people discovering how to riff themselves. Our faith development, especially within the community of Faust, will look much more like a bunch of artists just kind of coming together to do a jam session. No one's trying to control. But our experience give aid to each other when you're having a hard time with the transition. Because it's together that we create the more. Not that we control each other's voices, but we help to give it breath and to move. As John said, as a community experience, that which our hands have touched, that which we've actually experienced, helps us to name the words of life that allows us to have fellowship together. So it's rooted there. But what happens when we become anxious? That our adapting the tradition is a sign of weakness, corruption, or a lack of faithfulness. And this is where we get to step into the next chapter of John to remind ourselves of how we got to this moment. Because John's dealing with the community wrestling with the same thing. And he says, remember that it's God's furious longing for you that has brought us into community. In 1 John 4:16 says, for we know and we have come to trust the love that God has for us, which results in a maturing love in 17 that says that this love of God that we've trusted that God has for us is maturing so that we have confidence in the day we are examined. Since mature love casts out fear. And to me, it's always been a thing kind of when you see young love, especially like high school, there is this nagging anxiety and fear. You break up 5 times in a week, you get back together. I've seen some do it throughout their 20s in life, so it may not just be a teenage thing. But in young, immature love, we typically have this anxiety. How do we know we have our place? How do we know it's okay for us to exist, to breathe, and to move? And John says part of the way that we're able to say that our community experience can inform a hermeneutic that allows us to expand the table and interact with live improvisation is by reassuring ourselves when we come into anxiety that our place is secure because we got here by the furious longing of God. That says we have come to know and we have come to trust the love that God possesses for us. That's what we rest on. So that when it comes to the idea of being examined for the kind of work we build and we do, that a mature love will remind us that our place is secure, that we have agency, promise, and even a responsibility to build here together. that we are co-creators, not just mindless repetition. With that being said, how do we know the new readings, our improvisations, come from God? Because inspiration can come from anywhere. So before answering this, I'd like to give you a definition of love offered by Thomas J. Ord, who has written extensively on theologies of love from psychology and the Bible. And he says, to love is to act intentionally in sympathetic and empathetic response to God and others to promote overall well-being. So if at any time that we say we're being loving and it's just, I'm being harsh because you need some tough love, you're probably not promoting their overall well-being. So it's not loving. At any time, it's not sympathetic and empathetic response. So you're not actually emotionally attuned to the people you're dealing with and you're just trying to control or coerce. It doesn't fall within the definition of love that Thomas J. Ord says comes from within the scripture. So how do we know that our improvisations are coming from God? At the end of 3, at the beginning of 4 in 1 John, it says, and this is Jesus' commandment, that we trust in the name of God's Son, Jesus Christ, and that we would love one another, just as he has given us the command. The ones keeping his commandments remains in him and God in them. By this we know that we remain in him, because of the Spirit that he's given to us. So, beloved, do not trust every spirit. Rather, test them to know if they come from God. So this whole framework coming out that John is saying, we need to understand whether this comes from God or not. We need to understand whichever new readings, whichever new movements, the way we're constructing our faith, if it has the essence of God moving through us. And he said there's 2 things to it. Confessing a loyalty to Jesus, centering the life experience of Jesus as a projectile, that which troubles us, so that we have a new imagination for the future. And while we do that, it develops a mutuality of loving respect for the body of believers, because John's letter is focusing on that community. So when it says love one another, saying, is the way you're holding faith and theology drawing you towards loving the community? So notice, the way to discern if you're right or not is not a war of proof texting or a plea for better historical critical methodology. It keeps centered the command of Jesus in 3:23. So it asks, does your new reading center Jesus and enable you to love the growing faith family more deeply? Or does it cause you to pull back and to cut off who's allowed to be in? And then in 4:7, he goes as far as saying, beloved, let us love one another, because we know that the desire for love, that love is God, and all those who are loving come from God. They know God. The ones who are unloving do not know God. So in the measuring of centering Jesus, it says, how do we know our new readings are doing well? Does it help you to become loving? If it closes us off from each other, then it hasn't come from God. God allows improvisation towards the inclusion of others to promote their overall well-being. And God often allows us to violate the concepts of purity and holiness to expand and enlarge the table. Because remember, if we're referencing Jesus keeping his life center, Jesus always was more comfortable at unclean and unholy tables with true humanity standing there than a bunch of people who thought they were polished. So I'd ask, what do your improvisations call you towards? Because no one goes just straight from the text. We all improvise. Does it call you towards a love and response to the people around you? Does it call you towards a deeper love and commitment to the family of faith? Or does it give you permission to end in isolation?